Birmingham, in the UK, in the late 19th century, was a bustling city, its reputation shaped by street gangs. The Peaky Blinders, in particularly, became infamous by their style and violent ways. The Peaky Blinders weren't just made up characters, they were part of a bigger culture of crime and social struggle in the Victorian Birmingham. These gangs dove into all sorts of criminal activities, reflecting the tough realities of life in the industrial city. Hey there, story lovers. Welcome to the Storytelling Podcast, your cozy corner for captivating tales. I am your host, Alejandra, and today we are talking about the real Peaky Blinders, about my beautiful city, Birmingham, in the UK, and explore the real history of these gangs. And you'll get a clearer sense of the true stories that inspired the popular TV series. But before we start, I would like to ask you for your support and click on the follow and subscribe button if you're hearing this episode on YouTube or any other podcast platform. I would really appreciate that, and thank you for the lovely reviews you have been leaving on the podcast. It means the world to me. Now let's get started. The real Peaky Blinders used violence and street smarts to carve out their place in leaving a mark in the community that it's hard to ignore. Birmingham street gangs showed up in the late 19th century, shaped up by the city's rough social-economic conditions. Industrial growth and urbanization fueled a rise in crime and violence. This grit environment led to the birth of several notorious gangs, especially in areas like Small Heath and Cheapside. During the Victoria era, Birmingham industrialized superfast. Factories popped up everywhere, drawing in workers by the thousands. Urbanization brought overcrowding and poverty. The working class was struggling with low pay and small housing. Many families squeezed into tiny, cramped tenements, and crime rates soared as people scrambled to survive in the harsh conditions. Some social organizations tried to help, but plenty of folks ended up joining gangs for protection or a sense of belonging. And young people, especially, saw gangs as a way to gain power and respect in their neighborhoods. By the 1880s, several gangs had formed in Birmingham and gaining notoriety for violent clashes. We have the Birmingham Boys or the Cheapside Sluggers, and these ones were the most infamous, fighting for local turf. Pubs, markets, and certain streets in places like Small Heath became hotspots. The arrival of railways made it easier for gangs to travel and spread their influence. And gangs became part of the local identity, attracting young men seeking excitement or status. Rivalries led to regular fights, fueling a cycle of violence that defined this era. Small Heath, with its crowded streets, quickly became a magnet for gang activity. Violence and street fights were common, and the Cheapside Sluggers earned a fierce reputation for loyalty and toughness. Most members came from familiar and similar backgrounds, united by the economic hardship. They stuck to a code of conduct and fierce loyalty to their neighborhood. They defended it. Territory disputes sparked ongoing rivalries with other gangs, and the industrial backdrop of Small Heath set the stage for many of these confrontations. All of this shaped the gang culture and cemented their presence in the Victorian Birmingham. Urbanization and tough living conditions created a world where street gangs could really take a root, and it's a wild chapter in the Birmingham history, which is big. Now, but what about the formation and the identity of the real Peaky Blinders? So, for example, the real Peaky Blinders stood out as a street gang in Birmingham during the late 19th century and early 20th century. Their unique style, strong leadership, and territorial grip set them apart. Their identity came from their fashion sense, notorious members, and the tough environment they call home. Now, the name Peaky Blinders came from actually their fashion choices. Some folks say that they sewed razor blades in the peaks of the flat caps, turning them into weapons. So they would throw the caps, the cap would rotate like a frisbee, imagine a frisbee, but there we go, we have razor blades. So it's a very strange frisbee. Others think that the name refers to the blinders, like the eye shields of racehorses, which added to their sharp styles. They were very mysterious in that fashion sense. And but the reality is that the exact origin is murky. So we'll just add it to the legend of it. Now the caps is real, by the way. Well, nowadays we just go outside with our Stanley Cup. They simply just pick up a cap with razor blades. Simple. But the Peaky Blinders made their statement with their distinctive clothing. Everybody knew that. Flat caps worn at a sharp angle, and then the silk scarves that gave them a certain flair. So they were fashion boys. They also used the bell bottom trousers to complete the look, which is strange for the 19th century. And this made them easy to spot. Their fashion wasn't just for show, it was a way of projecting authority and style. Members took real pride in their appearance, which helped them cement their reputation as the Birmingham's dominant gang. So, we have the dominant gang and their fashion. The strong leadership drove Peaky Blinders to success. Thomas Gilbert led with ambition and sharp instincts. Other big names we can include is Kevin Mooney, Harry Fowles, Baby-faced Harry, and Thomas Mucklow, which all play key roles in gang's criminal ventures. Each leader shaped the gang's direction and helped them to keep control over their turf. Peaky Blinders claimed parts of Birmingham as their own, mainly operating around Small Heath. They used violence and intimidation to keep rivals at bay. They also leaned on local businesses, running protection rackets, and flexing their influence. They were competing with rival gangs. They used strategy and alliances to grow their territory. Their power in Birmingham, in the criminal world, was hard to challenge. The Victorian Birmingham saw several gangs battling for control. Each group has its own identity and tactics, and they clashed, often turned violent. While I was checking and researching about the Peaky Blinders, this gave me a glimpse of the chaos of how the city's underworld was back then, because it was literally an underworld of gangs and criminal history. For example, the Birmingham Boys rose up in the late 19th century, and it was known for their tight knit structure of loyalty. They were mostly made up of Irish immigrants, and they used their close community ties to build up power in certain neighborhoods. There is Digbeth, for example. Digbeth is part of the Irish quarter. Normally, it's just the Digbeth that we know today, and I lived there. So, rival gangs went after them for territory because it's close to the city center, and this sparked fierce disputes because they were in the city center basically. But by the 1900s, their influence peaked, and some members even moved into legitimate businesses to clean the money, which helped them dodge police attention. Another gang was the Sabini Gang, and the Sabini Gang worked mostly in London but kept connections in Birmingham. Led by the infamous Sabini, they run the betting industry and clash with the Birmingham Boys. Violence was their calling card. They intimidated local businesses to keep control, and their fights with other gangs often played out in public spots. They couldn't care less. With money and connections, they bribed officials, making it tough for police to get involved. The Sabini Gang helped shape organized crime in Britain, for better or worse. The Sluggers became a major force in Birmingham. They were known by their brutal tactics and love of boxing. They started out as street fights and bare knuckle boxing, building a reputation for toughness. Over time, they branched out into more complex crimes. Their name, Sluggers, come from the hard-hitting fighting style. Fought other gangs for control of the boxing rings. These battles fueled their rise and eventual decline over the years. By adapting their methods, the Sluggers managed to survive changing times, and their ability to shift focus kept them relevant, and even as the gang scene in Birmingham kept evolving, they were known by their toughness. While the majority of Hollywood movies and even books, novels share about a cute side of the Victorian life, actually wasn't nothing like that. Victorian Birmingham's, for example, they had street gangs and they were knee deep into crime. They ran protection rackets, gambling dens, and used violence to make their mark. It was hard back then. And rackets were everywhere. So gangs demanded payment for businesses, promising protection for violence and thefts. And if you didn't pay, you risk assaults or property damage. This kept people living in fear. Gambling rings also thrived. Illegal dice, card games, they sucked people in, often leaving them in real debt. These gangs ran these operations, using threats to keep in order. Cheating was rampant, with gang members making sure profits always stayed in their pockets. But it wasn't just about gambling or protection rackets. Pickpocketing was another thing, and robbery. So, pickpocketing was a go to crime for many gang members. The busy streets made them easy to steal from suspected victims. Smuggling was another big earner. Gangs moved illegal goods, everything from booze to stolen property, dodging taxes and the law. And robbery and hijacking often happened, usually turning violent. Gangs didn't hesitate to use force and sometimes even murder to protect their interests. Life in Birmingham could get dangerous very fast. And as always, I like to bring some key figures and accidents that actually really happened. In the world of Victorian Birmingham gangs, it had its share of larger than life personalities and dramatic incidents that are still talked about. And for example, we're going to talk about Billy Kimber and his legacy. Billy Kimber led the Birmingham Boys in the early 1900s. He was sharp, strategic, and kept a tight grip on his turf. His gang dominated the racecourses business, offering protections to tracks and bookmakers. Kimber built connections with other gangs, networking, and spread his influence across Birmingham. He became a notorious local celebrity, and some say that he inspired parts of the Peaky Blinders series. Another person that we have to talk about is David Taylor. And David Taylor was another key figure in the Birmingham's gang scene. News reports often link him to violent incidents and turf wars. The Birmingham Mail, still today, covered these stories, shaping how the public figures saw the gangs. Taylor's actions and connections kept him in the headline, and his notoriety drew attention to the city's social problems. Another person was George Snipes. George Snipes' murder in 1923 became a milestone in Birmingham's gang history. It was linked to rival gangs, and his death highlighted the brutal world of gang warfare. He died after a clash with rivals, and witnesses quickly shared details with local media. The murder made people painfully aware of the dangers of gang life. Sometimes you just need to open your eyes. And Snipes' death was a tragedy, but it also exposed the violent conflicts that haunted the city. The story still stands out in Birmingham's criminal history, and you have many books about this. But what about the police in the middle of this? Was just Birmingham or the whole London Birmingham gangs just ruling everything? Not at all. So the Midlands Police, and just creating here a side note, Birmingham in the UK, they belong to the West Midlands or the Midlands County. So the Midlands Police work hard to manage gang activity in the Victorian Birmingham. Of course, they weren't the active. They tried different strategies to fight crime and keep it order. Looking at how they operate us, they help us to understand the ongoing push and pull between law enforcement and the gangs of that era, because not all of the police were, clean, but there was a huge part that were, and they were trying to work on their area as a police and keep everything safe for the inhabitants. Midlands Police kept detailed records about gang activities in Birmingham. You can see these records actually. These documents shed light on the policing strategies they used in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Officers leaned upon a lot of informants, still do today, and community reports to spot gang members and track what they were up to. Regular patrols in known gang areas became a routine, and police kept a close eye on prominent leaders. The leaders were known for the police. They also sent undercover officers back then to infiltrate gangs and dig up informations. That kind of proactivity approach felt especially important during especially the First World War, when crime rates spiked up so high that many left for the front. They preferred to go to a war than to stay in a city with so high crime rates. Can you imagine that? Police try to keep gangs from taking advantage of vulnerable people, with a particular focus on stopping youth recruitment into crime. Sometimes it worked, sometimes not so much. The Midland police didn't exactly make life easier for gangs, as I was saying. They were there, they were putting pressure. Their constant pressure forced gangs to adapt and keep them on their toes. Arrests became pretty common, and that pushed gangs to change how they operated. They started using coded language and got a lot more secretive. Some gangs even formed alliances to protect each other, which made things trickier for the police. And it was a bit of a cat and mouse game, really. Just another side note, whenever you were arrested and you were a gang member, you often wouldn't leave jail alive. Now, let's try to separate fact from fiction, the TV series versus the reality of what happened. So, in the TV series, Peaky Blinders blends these historical facts with a hefty dose of action and fiction. It draws on the real gangs from the 20th century Birmingham, that's correct, but the drama gets ramped up with a modern edge that romanticizes characters, that romanticized side of the gang, which was not true. Key characters and events, they blur the line between what's real and what's made up. And sometimes it's hard to tell where the history ends and the script takes over. For example, the Peaky Blinders gang actually existed in Birmingham. And they had the reputation of the sharp flat caps and the violent antics. We spoke about this before. But the persistent myth about them having sewing razor blades into their caps, honestly, that's probably not real, because we don't have proof of that. Still, it makes a good history, right? The real gangs dabbed in robbery and extortion, but their lives were far grittier than the show suggests. The series adds a lot of drama with characteristic leaders and tangled plots for never quite matched reality. Tommy Shelby, played by Cillian Murphy, sits at the center of Peaky Blinders. His character borrows traits from several gang leaders, so he wasn't real, and he was a mix of all the gang leaders that actually existed. Sorry to break your mirror, but Tommy Shelby didn't exist. Even though they made him with an emotional depth and complexity, and Killian is actually a super good actor. Killian actually gives Tommy a modern vibe that probably wouldn't fly back then. The whole rise from working class roots to a wealthy businessman didn't work. Mostly fiction, and for the sake of entertainment. But most real gang members never saw that kind of success or legitimacy. Still, it's not hard to get swept up the story. I love the Peaky Blinders TV show as well and the books. So let's just say that Tommy Shelby can be in the fiction real. But the show often takes liberties with history and blending them made up plot lines with things that actually happened. For example, you see political figures like Winston Churchill chatting with the gang. Did that really happen? No, it didn't. Those meetings were rare and honestly a bit overblown for the drama. Can you see Winston Churchill talking to a gang member? No, he wouldn't. Of course, the conflicts with rival gangs and police and whoever gets in the way, yes, that reflected some of the real events back then. And it's actually the part that actually spiced up the TV show. It was a real thing, so spice up. Can you imagine? The way it shows the economic struggles and the post war vibe in Birmingham feels pretty spot on. It's spot on, though. Even the details are fictional, the atmosphere in Birmingham itself actually hits close to home. It was real. And this was today's episode. I hope you liked it. And speaking about Birmingham is always a pleasure. And I had to include Peaky Blinders history and the real story versus the fiction's ones because it's a romanticized version on the TV show. And it's exactly that, a romantic, twisted version. And I'm sorry to break your mirror with Tommy Shelby that he was a mix of all the leaders of the gangs. To me, Tommy Shelby is more close to the leader of the Birmingham Boys, actually. But Peaky Blinders actually existed. As always, I have read all you DMs that you guys have sent, and it's always nice to hear from you guys. And I promise that I have other episodes ready for you here weekly at the Storytelling Podcast. Thank you for listening, and please remember that if you would like to send your stories or special topics to be shared in the next episode, please send it to the Storytelling Podcast 80 at gmail.com or follow me on social media as Ale Life Official. I'm going to leave all the links below. And before you go, if you haven't done it already, I would love for you to click and follow or the subscribe button wherever you hear this podcast or see this podcast because it's available as a visual episode on YouTube. And see you on the next episode.